My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm 30 years old and I work as a financial consultant here in Denver, Colorado. For 7 years, I lived a double life that nobody knew about. Every month, I secretly transferred $4,500 to my parents, covering their mortgage, utilities, credit cards, and every expense they couldn't afford. I told myself it was temporary help during tough times. I convinced myself they appreciated my sacrifice. I believed that deep down, they saw me as their devoted daughter. Then one February night, everything I thought I knew about my family exploded in my face. My parents had been in a car accident sliding off an icy road just 2 miles from their Chicago home. While they recovered in the hospital, I went to their house to gather documents for their insurance claims. In their bedroom safe, beneath medical records and tax returns, I found their updated will dated just 4 months earlier. The words on that page felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Everything they owned, everything I had helped them keep, was left to my cousin, Jake Wilson. Not just the financial assets, but a handwritten letter in my father's careful script that destroyed me completely. While Sarah has been our biological daughter, Jake has been our true family in all the ways that matter. He deserves to be recognized as our real son. 7 years, $378,000 of my own money. I had lived in cramped apartments, skipped vacations, and delayed buying my own home so they could keep theirs. I had eaten ramen noodles for dinner so they could afford steaks, and their response was to call Jake, who lived 3 states away and never sent them a penny, their real son. I sat on their bedroom floor holding that will, my hands shaking as the reality sank in. Jake had been their golden child since we were kids, getting praise for mediocrity while my achievements were ignored, but I never imagined they would make it legal. I never thought they would put their preference in writing and leave me with nothing. That night, back in my apartment, I made a decision that would change everything. I opened my laptop and systematically deleted every automatic payment I had set up for them. The mortgage company, the electric bill, the water bill, their credit card payments, all gone. If Jake was their real son, then Jake could handle their real problems. I didn't call them. I didn't send an angry text. I simply stopped being their secret financial lifeline. For the first time in 7 years, I went to sleep knowing my money would stay in my own account the next month. 3 days later, when the mortgage payment bounced, my phone started ringing with a call that would expose everything they had been hiding from me. I'd love to know where this story reaches around the world, so please drop a comment below and tell me where you're listening from. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel because your support truly means everything to me and gives me the motivation to keep sharing these real stories. Thank you for being here with me and listening to this journey. Growing up in the suburbs of Chicago in the early 2000s, our family looked like the perfect American dream from the outside. My parents, David and Linda Mitchell, had built what everyone considered an ideal middle-class life. We lived in a 4-bedroom house in Naperville with a manicured lawn that my dad obsessed over every weekend. My father worked as a regional sales manager for a medical device company, pulling in 6 figures annually. My mother taught kindergarten at the local elementary school and gave piano lessons on weekends. But beneath that perfect exterior was an emotional coldness that I felt from my earliest memories. Love in the Mitchell household came with conditions and performance requirements. My mother would inspect my school clothes each morning, making sure every detail met her impossible standards. My father reviewed my report cards like he was analyzing quarterly earnings reports, always finding something that needed improvement. Everything changed when my cousin Jake Wilson started spending more time with our family. Jake was my mother's sister's son, and after his mom died in a car accident when he was 6, he became a permanent fixture in our home during weekends and holidays. Where my parents saw flaws in me that needed constant fixing, they saw pure golden potential in Jake. Jake was 2 years older than me, naturally athletic, and had this easy confidence that adults seemed to worship. I'll never forget the moment I truly understood the hierarchy in our house. I was 10 years old and had just won 2nd place in our school district's science fair. I was so proud of my volcano project that I'd spent weeks perfecting every detail. I ran into the house clutching my red ribbon, bursting with excitement to share my achievement. but Jake was already there in the living room, showing my parents a participation trophy from his Little League team. Not first place, not even an achievement award, just a trophy they gave every kid for showing up to practice. My parents barely glanced at my science fair ribbon. Instead, they spent the next hour asking Jake about every detail of his baseball season, discussing which games they'd attend next year, and praising his natural athletic ability. That night, I put my ribbon in my desk drawer and never mentioned it again. This became the pattern that would define our family for the next 20 years. Jake's ordinary was always more valuable than my extraordinary. When I made honor roll, they'd mention it briefly before launching into stories about Jake's latest adventure. When Jake got suspended from school for fighting, they spent hours discussing how the other kid probably deserved it. By high school, I realized something that changed everything. No matter what I accomplished, no matter how hard I worked or how much I achieved, I would never be enough for them. That's when I made the controversial decision that shocked everyone. At 17, I got a job at a local bank and started saving every penny for college, determined to never depend on their conditional love again. But what I didn't know then was that this decision to become financially independent would eventually lead me to discover the most devastating truth about who my parents really were. High school became my proving ground, but no matter what I accomplished, it was never enough to earn their attention. While Jake coasted through with C averages and spent most of his energy playing baseball, I threw myself into academics with the kind of intensity that probably should have worried someone. I joined debate team, student council, National Honor Society, and volunteered at 3 different organizations every weekend. My bedroom walls were covered with academic certificates, leadership awards, and scholarship announcements, but my parents treated them like wallpaper. Meanwhile, Jake's participation trophies were displayed prominently in the living room like they were Olympic medals. When I won the state debate championship my junior year, beating teams from schools 3 times our size, my parents attended the ceremony, but left early because Jake had a baseball game the same night. Not playoffs, not championships, just a regular season game. College planning revealed just how deep their favoritism ran. I had been accepted to Northwestern University's business program with a full academic scholarship worth over $200,000. The acceptance letter arrived on the same day Jake received a partial athletic scholarship to a community college in Arizona. Can you guess which achievement got celebrated? My parents immediately started discussing payment plans for Jake's remaining tuition costs, talking about taking out a second mortgage or borrowing from their retirement accounts to support his baseball dreams. When I showed them my Northwestern letter, my father barely looked up from Jake's paperwork. "That's nice, Sarah," he said absently. "You've always been so independent. We knew you'd figure things out on your own." The message couldn't have been clearer. Jake needed their help and attention because he was special. I was expected to handle everything alone because I wasn't worth their investment. That's when I made the controversial decision that shocked everyone who knew our family. I told my parents I would pay for my own expenses through college, including housing, food, and books, even though they could afford to help me. "Why would you do that?" my mother asked, genuinely confused. "Because I want to know I earned everything myself," I replied. What I really meant was that I refused to owe them anything when they'd already made it clear I wasn't their priority. College became my escape from the emotional wasteland of home. At Northwestern, professors remembered my name, classmates sought my input on projects, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely valued. I graduated summa cum laude with a finance degree and landed a prestigious position with a consulting firm in Chicago. My starting salary was higher than both my parents' incomes combined. My graduation day should have been a moment of triumph. I had achieved something remarkable, entirely through my own effort and determination. My parents attended the ceremony, took the obligatory photos, and even seemed proud for about 30 minutes. Then Jake called with news that completely overshadowed my achievement. He'd gotten an unpaid internship with a minor league baseball team's front office in Arizona, not playing professionally, just filing paperwork and answering phones for a team most people had never heard of. But you would have thought he'd been drafted by the Yankees based on my parents' reaction. At my own graduation lunch, surrounded by my academic achievements and job offer, my parents spent the entire meal discussing Jake's internship prospects and how this could be his big break into professional baseball management. My summa cum laude honors were forgotten before the appetizers arrived. That summer, I moved into my first apartment in Chicago and started building the independent life I'd always been told I was destined for. I was making good money, living in a nice neighborhood, and finally free from the constant competition for attention I could never win. But I had no idea that a financial crisis was coming that would test every relationship in our family and reveal who people really were when everything was on the line. What happened next would force me into a role I never wanted and uncover the most devastating truth about where my parents' loyalties really lay. Little did I know that a financial crisis was coming that would reveal who really mattered in our family and expose the true cost of unconditional love. The economic downturn of 2018 hit my father's medical device company like a sledgehammer. Hospitals were cutting back on equipment purchases, and his commission-based income evaporated almost overnight. At 56, he found himself competing with salespeople half his age for positions that paid half his previous salary. My mother's kindergarten teacher income had always been supplemental, never meant to support their upper-middle-class lifestyle. I first noticed something was wrong during Thanksgiving dinner that year. The house felt different somehow. The thermostat was set lower than usual, and my mother had prepared a much simpler meal than her typical elaborate spread. My father, who usually dressed impeccably, wore a sweater with a visible hole in the elbow. When I helped clear the table, I spotted past due notices mixed in with the mail on their kitchen counter. After my mother went to bed, I approached my father carefully. "Dad, is everything okay financially?" His face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "We're handling it, Sarah. It's not your concern." "But I'm a financial consultant," I reminded him. "Maybe I could help review your situation and find some solutions." The conversation that followed was one of the most painful in our family's history. Pride battled necessity, until finally, with my mother crying at the kitchen table, they allowed me to examine their financial records. The situation was worse than I'd imagined. 4 months behind on mortgage payments, 3 maxed-out credit cards, and less than $2,000 in savings. Here's where I made the controversial decision that would consume the next 7 years of my life. "I can help," I said, already calculating what I could manage. "Let me cover the mortgage and utilities until Dad finds stable work." The relief in their faces was immediate, but so was their discomfort, accepting help from the daughter they'd spent decades treating as secondary. What started as temporary assistance became permanent financial slavery. Each month, I transferred $4,500 to cover their mortgage, property taxes, utilities, insurance, and credit card minimums. To manage this crushing burden, I moved from my nice downtown apartment to a tiny studio in a questionable neighborhood. I canceled my gym membership, stopped taking vacations, and postponed every dream I'd built for my future. Can I ask you something? Have you ever sacrificed your own happiness to support family members who never seemed grateful? Drop a comment and let me know, because I need to know I'm not alone in this experience. But here's the plot twist that still makes my blood boil. While I was eating ramen noodles and shopping at thrift stores to afford their lifestyle, I started noticing Jake's social media posts from Arizona. Expensive. Restaurants, luxury apartment with a pool, new car, weekend trips to Las Vegas. For someone struggling to find work after his baseball dreams ended, he seemed to be living awfully well. During one of our monthly family calls, my mother casually mentioned sending Jake money for various emergencies, car repairs, medical bills, security deposits for new apartments. When I added up the amounts she mentioned over several months, I realized the horrifying truth. My financial support was giving my parents enough breathing room to fund Jake's California lifestyle. I was essentially paying for 3 adults while living like a college student. Also, Jake could maintain his image as the successful golden child who just needed a little help getting established. The irony was suffocating. The more I sacrificed, the more resources they had available for their real son. Then came the phone call that would change everything. 7 years into this arrangement, with over $300,000 of my money spent on their bills, my mother called with news that made my stomach drop. "Sarah, honey, we have wonderful news. Jake is moving back to Chicago. He's gotten an opportunity with a tech startup here, and the whole family will finally be together again." I had no idea that Jake's return would expose the most devastating betrayal of all and force me to make a decision that would shatter our family forever. Jake's homecoming was treated like a celebrity arrival. My parents drove to O'Hare Airport to pick him up personally, took photos of his luggage like he was returning from a world tour, and planned an elaborate welcome dinner featuring all his favorite dishes. When he walked through their front door that first Sunday, the transformation in my parents was instant and painful to watch. They became animated, engaged, genuinely joyful in ways I had never witnessed when it was just me visiting. Jake, now 31, had maintained his natural charisma, but something felt different about him. He wore designer clothes that must have cost more than my monthly grocery budget, drove a luxury BMW that seemed far beyond the means of someone starting with a new company, and spoke in vague terms about investors, equity deals, and exciting opportunities. "The funding round should close next quarter," he'd say confidently when asked about specifics. "Very promising potential for significant growth." But when pressed for details, his answers became evasive, filled with startup buzzwords that sounded impressive but meant nothing concrete. What alarmed me more were the subtle signs that Jake's lifestyle didn't match any legitimate income. He never reached for his wallet when we went to restaurants, smoothly deflecting when checks arrived. He mentioned living in a high-end apartment in River North, one of Chicago's most expensive neighborhoods, despite supposedly just starting with this mysterious tech company. And most concerning, he began asking my parents for what he called temporary loans. I overheard my father on the phone one evening after dinner. "Of course, Jake," he was saying warmly. "Family takes care of family. I'll transfer $2,000 tomorrow morning." A week later, my mother called with a request that had become sickeningly familiar. "Sarah, sweetie, we need you to increase the monthly transfer by $700. The property taxes went up again, and we're having some unexpected expenses." I checked the county tax records online that night. The increase was $112. The math didn't add up, but questioning it felt impossible after years of family conditioning that painted any challenge to Jake's special treatment as jealousy or selfishness. The situation crystallized during a family dinner 6 months after Jake's return. My mother had transformed their dining room into something resembling a celebration, preparing an elaborate meal that probably cost more than I spent on food in 2 weeks. Jake entertained everyone with carefully crafted stories about his Arizona adventures and his bright future with the Chicago startup. "If this next funding round comes through like we expect," he said with practiced confidence, "I'll be looking at stock options worth serious money, maybe even enough to help you guys out financially." My parents hung on every word, asking follow-up questions and expressing amazement at his business acumen and generous heart. When I mentioned my recent promotion to senior consultant, managing a portfolio worth over $60 million, there was a polite, "That's wonderful, dear," before the conversation immediately returned to Jake's much more fascinating prospects. My real achievements were footnotes to his imaginary success stories. After dinner, I found myself alone in the kitchen loading their dishwasher, a task that somehow always fell to me while Jake relaxed in the living room receiving more attention. He wandered in as I was scraping plates, leaning against the granite countertop with the kind of casual arrogance that had irritated me since childhood. "Thanks for keeping Harold and Linda afloat all these years," he said quietly, making sure his voice wouldn't carry to the living room. "Really freed them up to help family members who actually need the support." The plate in my hands nearly shattered against the sink. "What exactly are you saying, Jake?" His smile was knowing and deliberately cruel. "Come on, Sarah. We both know where their extra spending money comes from. Your monthly contributions give them breathing room to help the people they actually care about." The realization hit me like a physical assault. My financial sacrifice, my 7 years of living like a struggling student, had been indirectly funding Jake's luxury lifestyle while my parents watched me struggle and ask for more. But Jake wasn't finished destroying me yet. He moved closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that felt like venom. The best part is how grateful they are when I let them help me, unlike some people who make everything feel like an obligation. What he said next would expose a truth so devastating that it would finally give me the strength to do what I should have done years earlier. The phone call that shattered my world came at 11:57 on a Tuesday night in February. Chicago had been hit with a brutal ice storm that afternoon, leaving the roads coated with deadly black ice, hidden beneath a deceptively thin layer of fresh snow. My parents were driving home from dinner with friends when their car hit a patch of ice on a curve just 3 miles from their house. "Both patients are stable," the emergency room nurse assured me over the phone, "but they've sustained significant injuries requiring hospitalization and extended recovery." I threw on clothes and drove through the treacherous streets to Northwestern Memorial Hospital, my mind cycling between genuine worry and the practical concerns that always seemed to fall on my shoulders. The ICU corridors were eerily quiet at that hour. My father had suffered a broken collarbone and severe facial lacerations from the airbag deployment. My mother had a compound fracture in her leg and a concussion that left her drifting in and out of consciousness. Despite our complicated relationship, seeing them vulnerable in those hospital beds stirred protective instincts I couldn't suppress. I spent 4 days practically living at that hospital, coordinating with insurance companies, scheduling specialist consultations, and handling every detail of their care, while Jake was mysteriously unreachable, despite multiple calls and texts. On the 5th day, once they were stable enough for transfer to a rehabilitation facility, I went to their house to collect personal items and locate important documents for their extended care. My father had weekly directed me to his home office. "Check the filing cabinet for our insurance policies and look in the safe behind the landscape painting for our healthcare directives and power of attorney documents." The safe combination was my mother's birthday, a detail that struck me as I entered those familiar numbers. Inside were the expected medical documents, but beneath them lay something that would destroy every illusion I'd maintained about my place in their lives. A legal document titled Last Will and Testament of David and Linda Mitchell, dated just 5 months earlier after Jake had returned to Chicago. I should have simply taken the healthcare directives and left. But some instinct, some premonition that my life was about to change forever, compelled me to open that will. The legal language was formal and cold, but its meaning was devastatingly clear. After small bequests of jewelry and personal items to various relatives, came the paragraph that felt like a dagger through my heart. All remaining assets, including but not limited to real estate, financial accounts, investments, and personal property, we leave to our nephew Jake Wilson, who's been like a real son to us in all the ways that truly matter. 7 years of financial sacrifice. $378,000 of my own money. I had delayed buying a house, skipped vacations, lived in substandard apartments, and eaten discount groceries so they could maintain their lifestyle. And their legal response was to declare Jake their true heir while reducing me to merely their biological offspring. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. Beneath the will was a handwritten letter in my father's meticulous script, an explanation that felt like emotional assassination. While Sarah has been our biological daughter, Jake has brought joy, warmth, and genuine love into our lives. He deserves to be recognized as our real son and treated accordingly. I sat on their bedroom floor, my hands trembling as I read those words again and again. The house I had been paying for would go to Jake. The retirement accounts I had helped preserve would go to Jake. Even their personal belongings, items that should have held memories of my childhood, would go to Jake. That night, back in my tiny apartment with copies of those devastating documents, I made the most liberating decision of my adult life. I opened my laptop and systematically canceled every automatic payment I had set up for them over 7 years. The mortgage company, the electric utility, the water bill, their credit card payments, their property insurance, gone, all of it. If Jake was their real son, then Jake could handle their real financial responsibilities. If I was merely biological, then my biological money could stay in my biological bank account. I felt no guilt, no second guessing, only a strange sense of peace that had been absent for years. I didn't call them to explain. I didn't send a dramatic text or leave an angry voicemail. I simply stopped being their secret financial foundation and waited to see how long it would take for them to notice. The answer came exactly 3 business days later, when the first mortgage payment bounced and my father's panicked voice filled my voicemail, demanding an immediate explanation for what he called a computer error that needed to be fixed right away. The certified letter demanding my presence at a family meeting arrived 3 weeks after I'd stopped all payments. My parents had returned home from rehabilitation to find past due notices from every company I'd been secretly paying. The formal letter indicated Jake would also attend to discuss the current situation. I decided to go, not from guilt, but to establish final boundaries. I prepared meticulously, bringing copies of every financial record documenting my support, plus the will and that devastating letter calling Jake their real son. The living room atmosphere was tense when I arrived. My father sat rigidly in his recliner, still wearing his injury sling. My mother was on the sofa with her leg elevated. Jake occupied the chair closest to her, looking smug yet uncomfortable as I took the remaining seat. "Sarah," my father began authoritatively, "we've called this meeting to address your sudden cessation of financial support during our medical crisis. 7 years of sacrifice reduced to sudden cessation. The will completely ignored." "There's nothing sudden about this," I replied calmly. "I found your will leaving everything to Jake while calling him your real son. After providing $378,000 over 7 years, I learned exactly where I stand. I adjusted accordingly." My mother flushed crimson. "That will was private. And my bank account should be private too, but you've treated it as your personal resource for years." My father leaned forward. "We raised you, provided for you. This is how you repay that obligation?" "Parents don't raise children as investments expecting lifelong returns," I said firmly. "That was your responsibility, not a debt I owe." I spread my financial documentation across their coffee table like courtroom evidence. "This shows every transfer over 7 years, money that kept this house and indirectly funded Jake's lifestyle. 41% of my after-tax income." Jake shifted uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact as the numbers were displayed. "Money isn't everything," my father dismissed weakly, though his eyes lingered anxiously on those statements. "You're right. Emotional support matters too. Love, appreciation, basic respect. Things I've never received despite years of sacrifice." My mother began crying, deploying her most effective conversation-ending weapon. "Look what you've done!" My father gestured at her tears. "Is this what you wanted?" "What I wanted was to be valued as your daughter. What I wanted was not discovering through legal documents that you consider Jake your real child while I'm merely biological." Then came the revealing moment. My father turned desperately to Jake. "Jake," my mother pleaded, "you'll help us through this temporary situation, won't you? Just until we work things out?" The silence was deafening. Jake's discomfort became palpable as actual responsibility landed on him. "Well, I'm really stretched thin with the startup situation. Cash flow is complicated. Maybe when funding comes through." For the first time in 30 years, I watched my parents' faces as their golden child revealed his true nature. Jake, their chosen heir, was abandoning them with empty promises. I stood gathering my documents. "I'm willing to have a relationship based on mutual respect, not financial dependence." My father's face twisted with rage. My mother continued sobbing. Jake was already reaching for his keys, muttering about a suddenly remembered meeting. "Goodbye," I said simply, walking toward the door as Jake practically sprinted to his BMW, speeding away to avoid any discussion of actually helping. As I drove home, I realized the most painful truths often lead to the most necessary consequences, and that the people claiming to love you most can hurt you deepest when their masks finally fall away. The months following that confrontation brought consequences that rippled through everyone's lives. Without my monthly transfers, my parents faced financial reality for the first time in 7 years. The bank moved forward with foreclosure proceedings, and they were forced to sell their house at a significant loss. They downsized to a modest 2-bedroom apartment in a less expensive neighborhood, trading their manicured suburban dream for the harsh truth of living within their actual means. My father swallowed his corporate executive pride and took a full-time position at a local hardware store. My mother picked up additional tutoring work to supplement their drastically reduced income. For the first time in years, they were working to support themselves instead of depending on my secret subsidies. Jake's reaction was the most telling of all. The golden child who had basked in their adoration for decades vanished completely once it became clear there would be no more financial benefits to extract. His calls became rare, his visits non-existent. The startup he'd claimed to work for apparently never existed, or at least not in any way that provided real income. Without my parents' indirect support, his luxury lifestyle crumbled, and he moved on to find other sources of funding. Meanwhile, I was discovering what life looked like when I prioritized my own well-being. The money that had disappeared into their expenses each month was now building toward my future. I moved into a beautiful apartment with natural light and space for the piano I'd always wanted. I traveled to places I'd only dreamed about, finally able to afford experiences that had been impossible while supporting 3 adults. The most profound change wasn't financial, though. It was emotional. I stopped checking my phone constantly for their approval that never came. I stopped calculating whether my achievements were impressive enough to earn their attention. I started building relationships with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. 8 months after our confrontation, an unexpected letter arrived from my mother. It was handwritten on simple paper, not my father's usual formal letterhead. She acknowledged the favoritism, the years of taking my support for granted, and the cruelty of that will. She admitted they had known exactly what they were doing when they chose Jake over me repeatedly. "Your father isn't ready for this conversation," she wrote, "and may never be. But I would like to see you, if you're willing, on whatever terms feel safe for you." After discussing it with my therapist, I agreed to coffee at a neutral location. That meeting was awkward, but it was a beginning. We established a cautious relationship based on new boundaries. There would never again be financial support, but there could be occasional contact if it remained healthy. The story doesn't have a perfect ending because real life rarely does. Some relationships can be rebuilt, others cannot. But I learned something invaluable. Family isn't defined by blood or obligation. Real family is built through mutual respect, genuine appreciation, and consistent care. I deserved parents who saw me as valuable, not because of what I could provide, but because of who I am. When that wasn't possible, I learned to become the parent I needed, protecting myself and nurturing my own growth. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who cannot love you properly. Sometimes setting boundaries isn't punishment, it's survival. Today I'm building a life based on my values, surrounded by chosen family who celebrate my successes and support me through challenges. I'm finally the daughter I always deserved to be. To